across industries, and whether it was unicorn startup where I worked for large corporates, they all talk customer. No one's really listening.
That was Peter Eckart, a 10x collaboration manager and expert in the space industry. In this video, he's going to share with us his best practices for developing market and customer insights in a highly complex industry. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. We're in election year in the United States, and then there's been global elections as well. Inflation is high. There's been layoffs in the market, but yet the stock market is doing very well. How do you really go out and tap into the market trends going on in your industry?
Since I'm in the space industry, I think first framework you have to have in mind, and I think this is true for many other industries, is what is really the value chain looking like, so that you understand a little bit the entire environment you're in. If you look at the space environment, everybody is thinking launchers because this is sexy. You know, they fly, they go boom. It's very exciting, and satellites. They go around the Earth. This is also cool. This is very much up the value chain. Ultimately, where the money is made is not very much through the launchers, not very much through the satellites. That is through you and I making maybe a satellite phone call, watching TV that comes via satellite, using GPS. So ultimately, in this particular case, in industry, you will find that most of the value is generated downstream by customers, by businesses, which then influences up the value stream. Of course, if you need more launchers, if you need more satellites, fewer satellites, which then decides whether the industry is on the up or on the down. You could argue that you talk to folks in the space industry, the guys who built the launchers and the satellites, and then you get a sense of what's going on. I believe you have to have a more holistic view. You walk down the value chain and see what the customers down there say. How is the thing going? How is the business going? What are their plans? Is this a growing segment? You know, satellite communications, what Elon Musk is doing. How real is this as a business? How sustainable is the business going to be? So I think you would always have to listen to the right folks. And in this case, it's, as in many cases, in most cases, the actual customers that you have to deal with here.
If you're let's call it a manufacturer of satellites, that you would want to understand the value chain above you and the value chain below you to better understand and predict your market trends. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what you should be doing. In this case, the space industry is a funny one. I mean, I've worked across many industries, tech. I've lived in Silicon Valley. I've done real estate. I've done work across many industries, although my background is in space and I love space, but they are all kind of living a bit of in a bubble. They often forget that they're not alone, that it's not just them. And that's why I think it's so important in this particular industry to really tell them, like, hey, get out of the bubble, understand where ultimately the business is really coming from. Case these days, you know, we have a lot of talk, how are we going to industrialize the moon? Right? Fine, I want to industrialize the moon. But too few of them is, when I'm on the moon, who am I selling what for? What, right? So who's my customer out there? And that's where the customer comes back in. You can draw the biggest plans about having wonderful installations on the moon. But as business people, we have to ask ourselves, well, where's the revenue coming from?
And are you doing that through interviews, with industry experts, and then potentially like B2B surveys, or like how are you understanding kind of the trends?
Surveys is also tool we've used, but I think that the interviews, as I said, down the value stream, in the core of the business a little bit and down the value stream, show you what's really going on. To give you an example that illustrates things a little bit. So one of the, in my humble opinion, unknown prospects in this whole arena is what is called Earth observation, remote sensing. So any information you can get about our Earth that satellites generate, but not only satellites, that can help us to manage the environment, to track traffic of ships, whatever else you can do there with these data. And I've been looking at this for 30 years and it didn't take off so much, right? I'm always thinking there has to be more business generated here. And so we did an engagement recently talking to potential customers, like in areas that maybe don't even know yet that there is something where they can use space data. And we found this interesting disconnect. In a sense, there were a few pioneers who already said, "Oh, we're already using this. We're already using in finance business, risk assessments, in insurance, et cetera, using satellite data. We use this already. Agriculture, we use this already." But you found this is pioneers. It's a very nascent business in this case, which we found talking to a lot of people. And some we're already leveraging, some we're not leveraging, and many opportunities are kind of, yeah, defined or are in the idea stage. So here we could come back with a report like, yes, there is business to be had, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation in many cases where the potential customers don't really understand yet what, say, they could use space data for and how that could help them with their business. And on the other side, you have the spacey guys with the data, right? Who, well, we have the wonderful data, you just have to use it. And so we found we have to connect these two to say, okay, what do you really need as a business, right? And oh, what do you have in terms of data that could potentially help me? And then they jointly develop tools, apps, you name it, that can then be monetized, help everybody make money, save money, and so on and so on. And it was a very fascinating finding where we went out of the bubble and realized the business opportunities potentially there, but it's not an easy one to develop. And you have to just pull a few loose ends together, so to speak, to make that happen. So I think this is one example how always you need to get to the customer, have to understand their needs, and then be able to, so the customer wise, decide whether or not GSA have a business case or a potential business in front of you or not.
That's a perfect scenario. And let's generalize it a little bit. I have a potential product, and then I have what I think is an identified customer base. Let's call it audience now, because we don't really know if that audience is a customer yet. How do I do voice of customer to then go figure out, one, if I have a product, and two, if I have a market, and what do they need, and kind of go through that product development process?
So it could be as simple, just knock on someone's door. I think when we look at it in a more mature context, I think, and I've done that many times, whether it's for software or for hardware, to reach out like, what are your general needs? You know, how's the demand shaping up over time? Product features, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, to really go out there and explore these needs and then go back to the customer and say, hey, we talked to 10 people, to 20 people, you name it, how many people. Often you don't really need as many if you choose wisely, and say, yeah, your product resonates or something is missing, or you know what, the product is cool, but we've got the service infrastructure in place, because what we heard is like service infrastructure is what makes you win the deals, and so on and so on. I think I've done that many times. It works across all industry, and it's in a way magical, because if I say 10, 20, that may sound small, but I've done the magic with 5 or 6 interviews, and I myself sometimes positively shocked if I just gather the input from 5 or 6 potential customers, client, and put them on slides and provide a readout, and think, wow, it's amazing. The
Hmm.
people we talk to and how many insights we generate. And I also personally believe that this is often being underestimated as a tool, because it's extremely good value for money. But another lesson learned across industries, and whether it was unicorn startup where I worked for large corporates, they all talk customer. No one's really listening. No one is really understanding. Again, as few as 5 interviews can already do some magic for you here.
So to set up that magic, as you're kind of saying, is the interview, for instance, a tops down or a pyramid type interview where you're understanding general trends and then you're bringing it down to trying to uh, determine product features, or are you doing multiple rounds of interviews where the first round is understanding the trends and the second round is going more into the product features? How do you kind of set that up?
Depends. I think the key driver is the maturity status of the product. So is it like a concept, or is it already an existing product, more or less, or the upcoming iteration of an existing product, yeah, depending on this. So that defines a lot in the interview, but the general starting point is always to understand the other side, the setting, so to speak, right? The business context, the business needs of the person I interview. Like, so always have this context for me to understand the potential customer, like, who are you? What's your business looking like, right? Literally, like, oftentimes physically looking like, and the associated needs as far as they relate to whatever product I'm discussing, whether it's a software or it's a, you know, a four-wheeler, what do they call it, quad car or whatever. I done all of these things. And from this context, then take it to the next level and be specific. So very quickly and very organically, typically within the course of an hour now, you have that picture of who they are, what they need, you understand why they need that product, what that product has to be able to do, and then whatever the service component that I mentioned. And then you do that a few times, and then you have it like a huge puzzle in front of you, and like, okay, great. And then you can report back like, okay, this is like your types of customers, this is their types of needs. And again, depending on product status, you can say, okay, you better make sure you have this, that, the other, or the option for this, that, and the other. Or if it's an existing product, you better add this feature. So all this you can translate and could figure out in these very, very fun calls. They're mostly also fun. That's the fun thing, because if you understand it, it's an enjoyable experience for the one like me who does these calls, and then it becomes an enjoyable learning for the customer or my client who learns all about the needs of their customer.
What I hear you saying is that depending on where you are with a particular, let's just say, product, right? If you're in the concept stage, or if you're in the deeper product development stage where you're tweaking potential features of that product, you're going to want to design a completely different survey or a completely different voice of customer type interview for each of those scenarios.
I wouldn't call them completely different. They're in like kind of structurally very similar as I've described, but they're of course content-wise then very different, right? They could be all the way to we don't even have a product, right? I mean, so we're thinking about developing a product, what is needed, and then it's a very raw question like, tell me more about what your life looks like and what your needs look like, and then we could potentially derive product features from it. So it really is on that span between very vague and very concrete, and that drives then the specifics of, say, an interview guide or so that I would always design. But the fundamental structure of context and then specifics, that's same throughout, and also throughout whatever industry we're covering, whatever product type or service type we're covering. It's always kind of very similar.
If you're looking to better understand your market and your customers, 10X will be happy to support you. We can combine expert interviews with surveys and secondary research to uncover the insights you need. Visit 10eqs.com and click on Contact. Looking forward to speaking with you soon.